In this tutorial, we're going to use the Input Data tool in Alteryx to read in some data and then use it within Alteryx. First, we're going to have to get the data. On the Canvas page for the course, we can go into the section labeled Files, and in there will be an Alteryx folder, and you'll go into the appropriate chapter that you're getting data from, in our example, Chapter 3, where we will see a file, unisexnames.txt. If you look in your Alteryx book, it describes what it is you'll be needing from this data and a little bit of a summary of what this data is. But for now, we can just click on the arrow here and download in order to get that data. Next, before we go into Alteryx, we're going to have to find out what format this data is in. The .txt is a good hint that it is probably in a text data format, but there are a few different ways text data can be stored. Let's open this up in our favorite text editor, or Notepad if that's all that's on this computer, and take a look. We'll see that there seems to be tabular data here. It's stored in some kind of a table. We have a header that reads name, year, female, male. These are our column names. And then for each row, we have some data. A name, a year, and then female or male. Based on what's written in the Alteryx textbook for this chapter, these are, for a name in a given year, how many babies were assigned that name. We'll notice that there are a bunch of blank rows. We'll talk about how to handle that in a later video. And another thing that is worth noting is that there are tabs separating the data. I mentioned there are a lot of different ways data can be stored. Sometimes it'll be a whole bunch of spaces in order to make it look like it lines up, or other times commas will separate different fields. But in this case, it's a tab. So with that information at hand, we can go ahead and close this file and go back into Alteryx. We will click on the Input Data tool from our Favorites bar. It is also in the In/Out section. And then we will click and drag it down into our workflow. This arrow here lets us choose what kind of data we're going to import and from where. We want a file, although on other projects it might be useful to grab something from SQL Server, another database, or something more exotic, I suppose. But for this, we want a file. We'll go and select from the Downloads folder, or wherever you saved what we got in our browser, the name of the file we just had. Since this is a Windows box, it'll helpfully not show me the extension if it knows it, or thinks it does. And then we'll click on Open. Now, by default, Alteryx isn't entirely certain what kind of data we're feeding it. It knows that we wouldn't be asking if it wasn't something that would be able to figure out, but there are a lot of different ways it can be stored. As I said when we were going through and looking at the file itself, it's a delimited file that we want. And what is the delimiting character? A tab. So that means that the different columns in our data are going to be separated by tab characters, instead of fixed width, which would be a bunch of spaces until it looks like a table, or using a delimiter of a comma, like is more common in non-text data. Also worth noting is that we need to make sure that first row contains field names is checked. What this will do is this will give us a way to tell Alteryx that we aren't going to manually specify what the columns are called. Just go ahead and read the first row. Once we click OK, we will receive a preview of our data. Notice the preview is labeled as first 100 records. The full file is much longer than that. But it does contain data in the same format we were expecting. Our next step will be going through and cleaning up a little bit of this data using the Select tool.